Okay. That's all right, Rinpoche.
Oh yeah, good afternoon and good morning and good night. Oh yeah, 다 ngatu lordo namba vjiti nangni tandevcha khiore khori ni megipcha pikapte tatere teni tela tsawi dungar samtang yanlak dungar rang sosu riktuk rang sosu thomo maimbar nyong yimbate tatere tati nangni teni 다 yanlak lap samlo tangnane dagim dordu chingmo chakman tani narak ni lap samlo tangna cawa ke dungar techembore kwenas chekchak ke sagjila patang tebjin to meyo patang sabshuk tamchit koryuk tang chi pa tamchit chekchak ke sagji yim patang tani chekchak sagji tang to me bar ke yo pa namjin ke tendi nangla dungar nyong ka kangsak yang tani yore shirtang ke 로브용 셰피는 뜬거라 랍고래 다 누가
Okay.
띵고
That's all.
농고 고마양 말다 있는 다다
The Tawadayana Gijela Yana Nangi
아
Mayamba. That's all.
데니 로브용 셰피 릭툭라나 소수 로브 릭툭라나 릭툭 소수 니바당 자르니 쫀당 자르니 로브용 셰피니 깜나 조보 데니 깡을 체후제나다 둥을 체후니 곱죽니 로브용 시니 름기름기 용나 Teni jamba tham chet layang lo li surungwa tang lo mjungwa lil hawo yore tipshir na tangpo lil hawo chigni thori ni ngop chukpa maimpa teni ngan song kagni samze teni yore riktuk ze na ngan song kagni samta teni tere techo teni riktuk tata dimbi gemtsin techo ogla kale kale khako kare tipshir na narak dawo inna 당 거룩 탐쳤더 매를 땅 사지 탐체 쩍쩍 임바 던디 디 땅도 깊이 디 땅도 동을 용고요 바 대응 세쳇 거원도 삼로 땅나 삼 몇개 비와도 용고요 버 던디랑 소수 무니 아주 삼로 땅 거래 왜나라니 때타고 임버 무니 디갑라 간데더니 다 콘수 동을 망탁니는 때 냠스 렌야제지 꼭 korkab me pa tadi ka nyoda chenpo yore te tang dev jin to sam samla tangwi dungar ze yang te tawo ta narak nikab ka dungar yin na cawa tang tangwa ze kare tangwa ha lepi tani tangwi nang ka tangwa tawo chakni na jiktan ji kamla te tang me pa tawo chigla samchin ke chok korwa tani sakji tamche tiyang tarar kyaktari yin ba tang tani jik kawa mbab ka yo pa tang na Tendi ke nang la ne te semchen ke ni mambo ke ni ne te dungar ke nam tang te sam ki me kya pi mambo nyong ni yo pa ta teli tang me pi no tat ngi per de tendi kya len kan yor wa kwen na nga chu mi yor la sam lo tang na yang ne shok shok ndawo yo re kang re ze na kwen na nga chu me ma mor ke choche ke ti yong yo sa ka woke na ze ke yo pa ti na la semchen mambo khh yo ra the sticker when na te na wo yin na te yong sa ka sa ji cha chang ko rang ka ni yong ko na cha wa re o ya te ni me re te ni ti na la sem chen dong yong kan ma bo yo wa ti na la ta khayo pa te na jin te ni ji ten ji kham la na tong wi dong te ni yong kan yang sa wi dong yong kan te ni yo re 온들이 신이다 동아티 체메 파타 온직더니 감달라 차와던 장위 동을 드니 용칸 요래 쌈난 듣거래 그냥 주 셈라 장화 옛나양더니 요로와 가주 회남 삽숑 가식 근카 알라스칸다고 땅나 가주 하고아이나 데리 잔비 다동 장화 할리바요사 장규 동규 데리 쳇임바 요 뜻거와 온든디 직던지 감나 데니 데니 동안용 코피 셈진 땅위 돕고 요로와 데 나머진 안디 나락라 키비 셈신 남라 삼로 땅나 콩추 셈라 데니 그 동안 그 명효비 와책 돕고 회나가 좀 멀음나라 차위 동안 마보 명송와 땅 땅위 동안 마보 명송 요척거라와 온데 나오진 그 데니 명효 버 삼로 땅나 멋트 바직 땅나 또 뜻거 말이야 요 말와 땅아 주 하고 누가 릭박 고니 삼로 땅나 직던진 감라 데리 참에 바 요척거라와 회나 데리 짱메 비 양요 척거라와 회나 럼신 타마르비 매직리 닌겨 섬겨 양아추 오케나 그 매그 차가요래 더닝 매이나 데라 럼바 망보요와 차와당 마차위 럼바 망보요래 회나 흥그 매당 싸그 매당 데니 도솔 그 매당 데니 남심시니 매랑 참마차 럼바 망본도가 디 남신 그 데리 차와 체메 비동을 요사 데라 나락세 교리 장와 데리 체메 바요사 디 동안요 데라 테니 샤곰탄 조금 쉿더니 데라 니케랑 솔라빈 데 잠진 득그레 테니 고노람 샬로난 근데 만돈 쉿당 데 코랑 송당 데노 코랑 나라 송오레 상지 그 장도 닌 송오레 문이 데타고 니치글라 요 구이 니바당 찻 데타고 인 고와당 딱딱 나오 대소 탐시 연금하다 옛날 더샤 셈시남 기 로용 셰피 쳇도 나츠 데타고 즉더니 송요레 딥셔나 데리 지네 삼로 땅야 데 데락샤 곰던 조금 셰고 그레스 어디리
So we're continuing with these 4 thoughts that change the mind and essentially examining the pitfalls of cyclic existence, which, as I mentioned, has 2 kind of basic categories. There's the 3 root sufferings, which pertain to everyone. And then there's the kind of branch sufferings, which is the individual sufferings of beings within each of the states of existence that have been sort of divided into what we call the 6 classes of beings, their own unique and individual experiences within each realm. And so then this is a mind training in which what we're looking at is where, what is in samsara. So then if we divide up all the possible states of existence of samsara, we could do it through this categorization of 6. And we're looking at, if we're born here, where are we born into and what is the suffering there? Is there any place free of suffering? So we're doing this mind training of examining then to see the pitfalls or flaws of cyclic existence. And to do so, we have to go through each possibility of what a being could experience throughout the realms of existence. And typically then with this classification method of the 6 classes of beings, then we have what are called the 3 more fortunate or higher states and the 3 less fortunate states. And so then the contemplation begins with the less fortunate states at sort of the worst level of suffering, where the suffering is just so obvious and apparent. It's very easy to see that obviously if you're born into that kind of existence, that state of existence, you're going to have suffering that's inevitable. And so it begins with what in Sanskrit is called narak, which is something kind of like the very worst suffering which could be experienced. And this has been translated into English as the hell realms, which is not a literally identical concept, but has some similar attributes in the sense of a place that is the worst kind of suffering in the context of samsara, which is a place, the worst kind of suffering that we could create and then have to experience the results of. And so then places with the very worst kinds of suffering. And again, We don't need to read the chapter, that section in the book. I request not to. But we can just simply think of then imagine, okay, the very worst degree of suffering that could possibly be created. And so then these could be hot realms of existence, like where there's extreme heat, in which one experiences like the ground, like metal iron that's hot, red hot, and the entire environment is being hot, and no escape from extreme burning heat. And if one created that level of experience, then we can see the being there, and we would imagine ourselves in that experience. What would that be like if we were born into one of these sort of hot, the extremely hot states, hellish states, narak, and the kind of suffering that beings would experience there? It's too much suffering. It's extreme suffering. Or we could think of it on the other level of extreme cold. So being born into a place where the ground is ice and the temperature is below freezing and we have no protection and we're just suffering from the experience of being cold. And so then what that would be like and the experience that that would be like. Many beings create the causes that produce that kind of experience, what we call the worst levels of experience in existence, of where they might suffer from intense heat and intense cold. And when we think about, how is that possible? Well, anything is possible. And we can see that there are places even on Earth where there is intense heat and intense cold, and a being could suffer in those states, like on, in our human realm on Earth. If you go to like a volcano and you look at a volcano and you consider then that that heat generated from the lava and so forth, and plenty of beings on Earth die in volcano in the lava and experience that suffering. And so then, of course, someone could experience that suffering, and so why not? That can arise to the perception of beings, or perhaps it's cold, and we have cold states in this on this earth, like if you go to Alaska or other places where there are times of year where the ground is covered in ice and everything is snow is coming down from the top, and it's absolutely frigid. It's freezing, and freezing has many levels of cold, and it can get very, very cold, and beings can experience that and be unprotected in those kinds of conditions. It's totally possible. And so essentially then we create, those causes and conditions, and then we experience their results. We can even have that in a dream. The habitual imprints in our mind stream can manifest in a dream where we have this experience of the agonizing heat of being burned, or the agonizing cold of being frozen, and so forth. We can have those kinds of experiences. It's possible. Beings can experience that. And so then the kind of hellish states, or the states in which it's the worst kinds of suffering that someone could create and experience the result of, where they have intense heat or intense cold. And those states, they need to be named. And so for the sake of a name, the Sanskrit name is Narak. And so there's nothing impossible about having an experience of that and being tormented by that for any period or length of time, within that realm of experience. And so realms that are the most hot or the most cold. And also when we think about this, like then that as a separate realm from the human realm, then the heat and the cold is much greater than we might experience on the human realm. For example, even when we look at fire, our human experience of fire burns at different temperatures. And you have different, like lava, volcanic lava is so many times hotter than ordinary fire. Or you can have fire that's created through grass, or fire that's created with wood, or fire that's created through burning coal. And it's going to have a different temperature to which it burns. And so here it's like the hottest, far beyond what we experience on, our human realm and levels. And the same with cold. Again, you can have many levels, temperatures of freezing. And so again, the coldest that one could ever experience, whatever is within the realm of possibilities, which is not limited by our direct experience or what we perceive and experience. It's the sort of karmic perceptions of the beings who have created the causes to experience this. And so then we think about how, of course, if we're born into these states, we imagine ourselves in those states, we think about that level of suffering, we recognize that numberless beings are experiencing this kind of suffering. So obviously, there's no happiness to be found there. It's that state is a state of suffering. And so we would do the contemplative and resting meditation. And in this context, we wouldn't read the chapter in the words of my perfect teacher that corresponds to this. And the purpose, Rinpoche said, is just that is looking at like what is going to benefit us and our minds. The way that the chapter was written was based on teachings of the sutras. Those teachings are called expedient teachings, which means it's a provisional to guide certain beings, but not ultimately, literally, exactly that. And so then they talk about a place and a lifespan and so forth in the words of my perfect teacher. And that particular explanation then is a provisional meaning to serve a purpose for beings that can be guided or benefited by that. And so that doesn't mean that it's exactly as described there on any literal sense and so forth, but we can understand then that beings have these long lifespans in realms where there is intense suffering of extreme heat and cold and so forth, what we would call in English hellish states of existence. And so for the purposes of our contemplation, we don't have to read about details of that. We can simply imagine it as our contemplative process and just imagine the very worst that you could imagine and then some. And then you would spend a period of time where you contemplate and reflect on that, and then you rest, and then you contemplate and rest. So you're alternating between contemplative and resting meditation. So?
데랬더니 니빠테 다 니빠테 예탁 그 동할 때 때래 예탁 나와 있나 소때 코란 샘신 요래 예탁 종치르야 예탁 니제야 직등이 감마보라 드니 요래 나춘 통고위 니빠 요 말아 드니 대 공수 리당 그거라 예탁 제때 코란 예탁 쥐바당나 꿈비 동할 요래 소 공수 칼라자다 둘로고야 메비 동할 때 샘신 삼기 make 비마보지 텔라케니 동할 드니 명후 요래 o testawore teni tela yetak ta kono lam yalong nang te kerang su ta tina yetak nam chang ma po yore teni dripa ma po chen teni yetak la rig dama na chokpa yore teni yetak yur zo yo sa chi ko zo yore yetak ni teni yetak kan thor wa de nga chu mar teni khwena sar tang tang teni sa gar tang tang nam kha tang te cho cha chang lang yetak yo chu re khwena nga chu 잔당 마모제야당 드니 지 나투 인제제한다고 제겐도가 마분잠 불랑란제제야 요래 때에 딱 그때 살라 똑거래 데니 유락 집닥 그나라양 예딱 그때 참 똑거래 마 체와때 예딱 그때 참나 똑로 그래 데니다고 데다 마보요래 칸토르 예딱 제야때 마보요래 딥 디스콤 그 동할 때 소양 데니 샤곰탄 조곰셴 데니 던로 라인나는 쏘고 giảm số 전부 나 비또노 망체와도 giảm số 전부 나 망체와 giảm số 전부 나 요래 단 나바 나초 봐요와 giảm số 제나 나초 giảm số 직부용 잠깐 말은 직된 감랍 삼지 메게비 giảm số 전부래 나초 어떻게데 총총 찍게 거랑 옛날 다동 직된 감 삼지 메게 발라데 giảm số 삼지 메게 봐요와 대추나라 샘친 던로 짱메 빠티나라 요래 던로 남기 쏘오더니 찍라 zawi dungar te mang chewa te kozo chik la zawi dungar tang. Tani tando kan thorwa te so nga so mi yur la samlo tang na yang ra. Zhan ki korshut chet pa tang na. Tendi tang yang jan ki so khu yo pa tang tendro nam so pa tang tendro yang nga zo mo jan ki yang mer nam ki kyang tendro te chorang ta ga chik kong zo so khu yo wa innocent tendro tendi da wo ma bo chik sa khu yo ri ni me ke tendro ma bo chik kyang teni sa khu yo wa teni nga zu za ge yo wa jik tendi kam la nga zu te chik pu sam lo tang na ha ko kre ngarang rang soso tendi da wo yin na kare yin sa re samlo tana ta nuba chenpo chik yungu yore. Karib shini rang rang soso teni rawo kegu samkanduk zena, ta manna ter tawo mapsam na kare re zena na lonyen tayo pa naam shinde. Kwen na nga tsu muwi nda ta kayo na ne, ta gyang ni karib shung kayo, cha sa nga tsu pa ta kayo re. Tela nuba chenpo te tsam yo ma re, nga tsu mthongwa tsam re. Yen nang rang ka nyam nyung ku go ni kha ko songan rawo yod na, teni shirin korwa la, korwa li tarndo ku lo kewa tang, teni nga tso kewa ngam mayang da chu nang la, kewa ndaman na tsok pab lang o gire, teni maung pa yang, deb langwar ngirwa teni yung chik kara wa. Dib shir na na teni, teni rang kiyang te tawu mangpo myung gu na, teni ngim jong kewa, rang nid yang ngim jong kewa tang, deb shin tuk jan sem shin tam shin dab nyung hu yo pa nam la teni, nyang ji chenpo ke kiyo re. Nga tsu kerang tsu ndatan go re, teni tsam 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 la, ton tsam kar kap te zo la, kerang tsu tsam tsam la, de ta ton chik ngo nim chik wa ta dzok song wi ni kam na ngi par ta sem la khar go wa te ne korwa li lor dok pa chik po mayim ba rang dot ye shit ti lor dok go song ngam ma ngi kerang tsu thak pa chen bu lor dok ze na ni kwa yo re ching korwa li lor dok pa ze kwen na ndar yang ni yang ndar ta wu ka nga chi rang kim nyung mop sam ba teni nga rang ni dewa ngoma chik dewa yang tak pa chik tobar ndo pa yo se te yang teni yang kar re ze na na shang chib ku sem lab lo jong shit gu kyo re di kare dok yo re ze na rang do ye shik tok pa dok yo re te ta un riu thar tu pa chik tobar ndo na si chet re ze na rang ni chik pu chet ma im par na sem chik jang ki chet yin bar te te gore ma to mo dak chin zen rang ni chik pu kona to pi chet yin na chon chik shong kyo re di shir na teni son de tam chap jir dang nga chu tong len nang ke kyo pa lob jong she kyo pa nang jing ka teni rang ra so su tim juk la teni sham ba tang nyang je ka ta teni chik pu yin nan dik kare chame nam je ta ma thap na yang thap na yang yak po yo re ta ma thap na yang teni sham ba tang nyang je ni ka son de tam chap jir dang tang jar ni ta lob jong chi shen na te pe nu pa chen bo yo re o teni ki jem san ki ta nga chu rang so su tem nyong hu yo pan da wo ka semlang kharna semlang ngirwa chenbo chin rogo yore. Ngimjong ku kurong yore, chik ngirwa teni rogo yore. Ni zhan la teni nyangje chenbo kewa te yonggu yore. Kwen nan didi semshin mabu nyonggu yore wa. Nyonggu yo pap samni teni zhang ki jilla nyangje yonggu yore. O didi res.
The next contemplation is what's called the hungry ghost realms. So these are beings who experience a different state of existence than ours. There are, it may be a completely sort of different realm where the land and within that cities and so forth, a whole sort of civilization of beings within certain states, ones that are not human realms and therefore we don't see them. But just because we don't see beings doesn't mean there aren't beings in the universe experiencing these kinds of suffering. And so these are beings who are experiencing suffering primarily from hunger and thirst. And so then their whole life is focused on finding food and drink and the many different kinds of sufferings that problems that arise, preventing them from being able to experience quenching their thirst, filling their stomach, and so forth. And so you can use the chapter in the words of my perfect teacher for that explanation. And it talks about actual hungry ghost realms. These are called pretas in Sanskrit. And then then what are called like the scattered hungry ghosts, which are not born necessarily in a specific realm with other hungry ghosts, but could appear and experience things anywhere. Like, for example, we have various kinds of beings and energies on the earth. Like in Tibet, we talk about senma and mamos. And in the West, you guys talk about ghosts and spirits and so forth. And so lots of different kind of varieties of possibilities of beings having various kinds of experiences. Also, for example, many of the spirits that people call gods or local deities or protectors of like owners of an area or locality. These are also, many of them would be categorized as the hungry ghost realm and so forth. And so again, this is a meditation in which we contemplate, we think about what kinds of experiences these beings have if they're born into these states. And we contemplate and rest alternately between the two. And so then we might spend some time doing that, focusing on this kind of state of existence that beings experience. And then we come to the animal realm, which may be easier or more sort of relatable to us because we experience them, animals on our Earth. But also there are animals in many other sort of planetary systems and realms and states of existence. The vast majority of animals on Earth are in the ocean. If we think about how many varieties of species and beings are in the ocean, there's just so many. And then, of course, all those who fly through the air and live on the surface of the earth and so forth. It's just so many beings and so many unique experiences and animals here in our human realm on Earth, which is just one small planet in the cosmos, and then animals in other realms as well, very similar, could have very similar experiences. And so we can't even conceive of or imagine their numbers, but there are so many animals. And of the various kinds of sufferings, of which there are myriad, specifically, they have the suffering of being killed and eaten by each other, like we can see in the animal kingdom when we look at them. And then also, and then And then we can see animals being used in the human realm, like by humans, I mean, where we use them where we enslave them, like farmers use animals for certain things, and then nomads use animals for certain things. And so there's, all these different uses in which animals are used and abused, and they're killed and they're eaten. And so animals then that have never done anything to us are treated so harshly by us, what we call innocent animals, animals that have not done anything to us, and yet we can treat them so atrociously. And so we think about, like, how we use animals and how we kill animals to eat them and so forth. And again, when we look at this, with these contemplations, each one, we want to make it very personal. So you're not like watching a kind of movie that's sort of distanced from you where someone else is experiencing that. But actually, you want to make this your own personal experience where you look at and see some kind of suffering that they have, animals in the slaughterhouses or how they're treated by beings or being eaten by each other. And then this is when you're meditating, and then you imagine yourself actually being that animal, having that experience. So the contemplative meditation is where you put yourself in their shoes. And you think, if I was born as this species and this being in this situation, what would it be like? Each one. And knowing that beings are experiencing it, that is a living being, a conscious being that's having that experience. So making it personal, so it's not just like someone else's problem or some other very like distance, is really important, that we really bring these to our personal experience. Because what that does is it really it does two things. It inspires us to find freedom, to not experience these kinds of sufferings, to be freed, to be liberated from them, to be freed from all of existence, because these are the states of existence. But it also helps us, so it brings that determination to be freed, because we see no matter where we're born, it's difficult and there's suffering, it's fraught with problems. But it also brings great compassion for beings, because beings are having those experiences right now. Beings are enduring that situation right now. That's their experience. And so we can have great compassion for them. And so that component is also really important to these contemplations. And so, we, on the one hand, we have, when we look at a meditation session, we have, from the beginning to the end of that session. And the purpose is to immerse our mind in these contemplations, to make them very personal, to put ourselves in that place of whatever we're thinking about, whoever we're thinking about, and recognize that this is a state of existence, that this is the nature of samsara, and want to be freed from that, so that we there's a sense, I must, this determination at all costs, I must be freed. Renunciation, to turn our mind away from a cyclic existence. On the other hand, then when we bring that to the Mahayana, then the intention furthers that is that then finding is that then that turns our mind away from just trying to get that for ourselves and turns it towards wanting that for others. So that's the second part that makes it the Mahayana training. So on the one hand, we contemplate these experiences, we imagine ourselves in them, we want to be freed, and so we have this determination to be freed, but then not just focusing on only wanting that for ourselves. Then by turning it towards others and wanting that for others, it becomes the Mahayana mind training of bodhicitta, where we overcome just wanting to help ourselves and we wish to benefit others. And that is really ideal in these circumstances. The purpose is primarily then to generate the determination to be free from samsara, and then on not just for ourselves alone, but on behalf of sentient beings, that we can benefit them. So by generating that compassion towards them, it overcomes then the first overcomes our attachments to cyclic existence, which keep us here. The second overcomes our attachment to self, which prevents us from benefiting others, and so forth, self-clinging and cherishing. And so, for example, the meditation session is the process of contemplative meditation and resting meditation, and we use the book as a support, and we make that very personal. And then at the end, you could do a loving kindness meditation. If you have time, you could do the full, 4 measurables, or at the very minimum, do the 2 branches of loving kindness and compassion, and use that with the 4 branches of supplication that we've learned in other contexts. Then very powerful. It makes this meditation very powerful. It makes it very personal and experiential for us, and it also really helps to change our mind in an impactful and powerful way. And so from these contemplations, we're not only generating a real determination and wish to be free, but we're also experiencing great compassion for beings in that process. And so in this way, then the renunciation is then joined to compassion. So.
예, 대니 다 nganson somla techi, 대니 tori somlana karere zenana latang ore ta tangbo mani do na de metani malap samlo tang matang lamayin tang lase de yorwa te chore te manda wala samlo tang na tanga chu hakko gre kewa gawa 나와 치위니까 그 동을 가수 다스타 뭐마부 깨위니까 그 동을 장해요 말에 뭐마부 다동 가위 동을라 레비오 말에 양 마보 지금 치위 동을라 양 레비오 말에 마토모 문이 피안나테 깨와 가와 나완 치위 동을 땅 대니종때 뭐라나 소소 그 문도바 톡도 바빠 도바 톡도 먹케와 당의 대비진도 즉자 당와당 찻기 똑비 동을 땅의 년시안바담 렛로 그래 삼비 동을 라 속바 답 삼지 먹게바 민직든 달랍 삼로 땅나야 아주 하고 근데 와 땅상 그 믹서 땅상 근데 개컵 가와 있나온다 개컵 강 가와 있나온다 되니 계속 간대직 담들 요나온다 아 되니 걔랑 무스직 있나온다 대랑랑 소수 무니 땅 걸어한들라 땐니 민직든 좀 토리 그나래다 다동양 가서 님종께 탑사직 땅네 동을 요바데 가 손당허요래 님종께 알시발라 소들이 가서 명그라나 소수 명화당 영나 잔샘친 머남기 명허요 발라 삼로 땅나 땅상당 가서 자르갸당 들이 그 나니 다 강한 요다 차상 통도 그요래 가르테 때타고 지금 통거 맨나 가서라나 소수 샘나라 카르고 그요라 온들이 명허 요끼래 깨와 가와 나완 채와 땅라나 소수 둥을 들이 요끼래 들이 요끼래 삼레 얘나 다땅 아주 무스 맥금 통기요래 나비 고기요래 락비 락기요래 원섬 기더니 어야 되니 명통 락선 피해요라 어 때타부 시니 땅상 때요래 때랍되니 라나 소수 로중쉿 멀라되니 로중시나 답에 하고야 지요래 어메뜨리레스
So those are the three less fortunate states. But then if we examine the more fortunate states, which are called the higher realms, then these are threefold as well. They can be categorized as what's called a God realm experience, demigod realm experience, and human experience. So we can begin, for example, with the human experience. So here we are. It's more fortunate than those other states of existence as being born as humans. But we all have a basic suffering that pretty much everyone experiences, which is birth, aging, sickness, and death. And so we may not have experienced all of these yet, or we may have experienced a number of them. Most of us don't remember the suffering of coming into this world of our own personal birth, but there was a suffering involved in that. And then we probably have experienced sickness or injury. We may not yet have arrived at old age, and we haven't yet experienced the suffering of dying. But we can see that all of this array of suffering applies to all humans: birth, aging, sickness, and death. And then, of course, we have all other kinds of plethora of sufferings: the suffering of not getting what we want, the suffering of getting what we don't want, the suffering, for example, of encountering our feared and hated enemies, having to meet face to face with our enemies, or the suffering of having to be separated from someone we really love, our loved ones. And that is, all of these things are things that happen to everyone on earth. That's our human experience. And some form or other of these sufferings are inevitable for each of us, no matter who we are, no matter where we go, no matter where we're from. So whatever country we were born in or live in, is not free from these. No matter what kind of culture or society we are in, it's connected to these. Whoever we are as human beings, each of us encounters these sufferings and all of our other own personal sufferings that arise to our perception and so forth. And so this is one of the states in samsara. This is the human realm. And it's good to remember that this is one of the better states. This is considered to be a more fortunate state, and yet the human realm alone has plenty of suffering, a sufficient amount for us to want to find freedom, to have that determination to be freed. Just by looking at our own, being aware of our own personal sufferings, and also then the aware of the suffering of other living beings. We can see how intense it is, how many problems there are, how much suffering there are. And so this isn't something that we have to kind of imagine, where it's not a direct experience for us as humans, because it is. So we don't have to imagine the potential of suffering in this way or that. We simply know that suffering. We can directly perceive birth, aging, sickness, death, and all of the other problems. We can see it with our eyes. We can hear it with our ears. We can touch it with our hands. There's this beautiful Tibetan expression. It says, seen with the eyes, grasped with the hands, which in English would be like a direct personal experience. And this is our direct personal experience. And this is something to, when we do mind training in this, when we really look at what happens in the human realm, we can see that it is a source of suffering, that these are the nature of being human, of this existence. And that's very clearly brought home through actually meditating on it. Also.
Oh yeah, tani mi kangar tang nyugda te yang na kunzong la mi jalong nang la tata ti nang la gimsan dang chi pi goni shat yore tani kande che kendo korang kannak ka goni shat yore wa ti nang la kannat zong ni mer ri dungar tak shat tab kamar sok chi ka ta yin na yang tani zo tani nat te zo kande chi ni yong yo ti nang la yore te nang jin chi ni te la tab lo yong she ko ya te o tani res Tenin tsam la nga tsu sem ka na la yang kyo wanda ngamba kye yung wana teni yo chik kare. Teni kye yung yung ni kap te la yang teni nga kang lap sam lop tang kore zen na nyangalin di pip shok la sam lop tang ni ti jewa tang, ti dewa tang, ti yon tan. Ta tang korwi ni kap ka dungar kwe na narak ka dungar te ti che me pare ta ti dok shok so nyangalin di pam tar tuk pa top so na dewa ti che me pa te nyangalin di pim tar tuk pa yorwa. Ti dewa te rang ka sem tam re yo pa tang, rang ka top ta pa tang. Rang ni ter tawu lam la yuk yo pa tang. Teni ter tawu yuk pim tenkin tam che tsang yo pa sok la sam lo tang ni. Yang teni tsam tsam chowa ke teni yong yo re o teni shi na te pan tok yo re se.
And so you can, again, use the words of my perfect teacher as a guide. It gives many different aspects and reasons for human suffering. And so, of course, it can't go into each individual person's full range of what they suffer over, but it has many very key salient points that are applicable on a wide scale to all human beings. And so it's a very helpful thing to get all those angles by using the book to give us those different perspectives and ways of looking at the suffering of human beings. And so this is something that we need to do mind training in. Now, on occasion, it's very possible that in contemplating these, that then we become really sad. That we'll have moments in any of these contemplations on suffering of real sadness. And so if the sadness is kind of comes up and it's strong, then at that time I invite you to focus on transcendence of suffering, nirvana, finding freedom. So then, just as we have these depths of despair and sufferings and so forth in cyclic existence, the opposite too is possible for all of us, each and
소소
every
탄도
being.
비었나 타르터브요
Then, if
바래.
we want to find freedom, we can find freedom.
이나 딴니 타르터브
But
메낭 아토 간데리.
if we couldn't, if this was it, and we were just here forever, how would that be? But just as there's this great depth of suffering, the opposite is a great depth of peace and well-being and so forth, which is that freedom from cyclic existence can happen, and it can happen for every single one of us. And so then that, and it can be such a sort of a great exaltation, a great experience of elevated, extraordinary love, peace, and happiness, just as the experience of suffering can be so intense. Its opposite, too, is possible. And it's possible because it's connected to our mind. Its potential is within the nature of our mind. And so each and every one of us can attain freedom. And so then we recognize that potential in ourselves and others, and that we have entered onto a path towards that, and that we have so many positive causes and conditions supporting us to do that. And so generate some joy as well. And so from time to time in these contemplations, if a sadness arises, I invite you to rejoice as well by generating the joy of thinking about the
가레즈나
potential of freedom
띠
and how it
교와요
lies in all
바테
of us.
교와요 바테 타르와 동일 그 길란로고요.
The sadness is okay because it becomes a cause for us to want to find freedom. So it also has a positive quality. It's having a positive effect on us. It's not a bad thing.
When mo mambo ji dansa kangar nyogda mambo chat in teni tamatela konsu mixer kalam chi la yuku kundu samni rana sosu chi sol yong kundu ga o ti gem sante kare re na korang ti dungar ka kangar ka nam tang de myuni ti nu ba tela tenni rana sosu sem ti sholan ro yo pi nu ba tela yore o te di res.
And so you see so many stories where people have endured an enormous suffering, and that the outcome of that, at the end, what do? They seek a path to finding freedom. And so then they begin to search for freedom. And so that becomes the impetus for actually finding freedom. So all these different kinds of suffering, actually, then the experience of that has this potential for us to be free in it. And so that's the sort of positive aspect or perspective on the suffering. It's what we can gain from it that is good. Awesome.
오뜨리더니 하마일란 탑소기 둥어를 세야테 때리 떠영디 곤도나미 잘로나라 여보 송요리 대남신데 대니 하율 놀하다나 탑소제나 콘수 델 하마인 때덕 탐칫 코랑랑 훅거 셈 착톡잔 땅나 셈 마시와 땅나 토리 인경나 콘수 셈페 둥얼만 보용건 지그래 둘 딱도더니 착톡젠 보인바 던디 지그래 더니 캬퍼더 흥 혹삼기 흥집샤와데 하마인기 유라 끼요리 자와 예나 세몬 놀하그나라 죽요리 토니오 파레 딥셔나 더니 세모니 칸톡 다만 나쪽발 하이 롱쇼티네 콘소 텔람 착톡지니 더니 콘소 막툭다고 잡니네 데디시니테 하남고 소 하남 소놈 그토고 하 야카토고를 딱벌 더니 하마인 그 뭐때덕 탐치 셈신남 흐와드 정망포레 하드 단체와 빼마트비 뇽뇽레 딥셔나는 더니 더디 그 동아리요 마보 지교레 다 팀 손니는 하마인라양 샤금던 조금 쉿 더니 하유제아테 치포 동위 동아를 제아데 때를 하제나 셔탄 하유 께포레 니 콘소 흐마란 그 와르도 둥어기 둥어 쳔보 요 말에 다 카히라가 망축라 죽비니까 요러와 하마인당 탑비니까 마토고 멍체와라 둥을기 둥을 쳔보 요 말에 사유배 남영만 보여서 죽당 자당 저당 로당 락샤 포숨 쪽바요 사레 데라가 영니는 더니 콘소 데라가 영니 셈 데라가 영니 옛나양 단 치람비니까 블라 마크 공고는 라 강참 지라 콘순 체와 하고 공고요래 더니 콘소 쳐 하고 공이니 감나 콘소 루영 ngatu men nakhayo pa nangjin gingo chakhayo pa nangjin khonzo yang tani lubo yang mdok jan tingir tani metok kum changwai khonso takpari ore teng nyang pa chak tani trobo jan chamcha yang zirla yung mendot pa ndawo shini te mabzat khonso kewa ti khasona tiji la ngansong la kewa ringirwa tang tani yinna ne khonso te kala kewa yin la sok pa thamsong kha ko ya tang tani yore pe tani dungar karam jin jan chik yore tip sharna tani han chimpo tongwi dungar zate o tani shini yore ta te tani sha gom dang jo gom shet ta te tani an korwi dungar tuksum dungar soli ji pa te ze yore ta te sha gom dang jo gom shini korwa she tang she tak kangar tang nyok dalap samni ne sha gom dang jo gom shi te la tani ne tani 티 톱기 tani teli ngiprim jong wibshirto ze teli tar sha wibshirto langtor manor lamla sonu ta ona dungar korwi dungar mamnyung war maung pa na rang kum nyung mar gu ba chi fang go na thap kare zina ngipar thap kare ngamangi kyang to la juin temde de tani korwa ji pa te rik tu ko rang so su kam nyung hyo pa tem ribu re tim ribu te tak tam che je tang ken la ma tu na namba kon to yung ya chik tang nyam sum yung ya ze chik yung ya yo mar 티 shirnana 티 gyotang ken zayate kar rezena ta li gimri zayate te la thungro kare ti ta kani yong rezena li la thungro kare zere o tere tani li kani yong rezena nyomo par tena teni li sakrawa tani nyomo pa kani shong rezena ne nyomo pa na marik pa ka tsawa chan li shong rez marik pa kani shong rezena ne tebjin shakpi sem kirni luk ko ngo ma khipi chu kirni luk ma khipi tani marik pi wangki tani shong wa reze 어떤이 신입 쇼어래 어떤이 레스
Then the next categorization, the second of the three more fortunate states, is what's called demigods, which is sort of like the non-god, almost god experience. And these beings, their experience is characterized by jealousy and having quarrels and fighting and so forth. And so there's a lot of sort of material comforts. It's a semi-god realm type experience, but then there's all this affliction and strife. And so the words of my perfect teacher gives a great amount of detail of what would define a demigod-like experience. And essentially, we have these beings who have created a kind of an abundant reality, and yet they're afflicted by intense jealousy and fighting and quarreling for various reasons, so their minds are not at peace, despite these sort of God realm type, sort of abundant, plush experiences that they might have. They're sort of eaten up by their mental affliction of jealousy. And particularly, then there's an interrelationship between the semi-god realm, demigods, and the god realms, in which there is, in certain specific instances, it's said to be a tree, a wish-fulfilling tree, that has a very special tree, and its roots grow in the demigod realm experience, and its fruit, the top, the canopy, is growing in the god realm experience. And then all of the fruits of this tree are enjoyed by the gods, and the sort of semi-gods are not able to enjoy that, but they know that it's there, and they know that the tree is there, and they want that fruit.
ngma
And
rik tu
so
ko nga chu khweri chi giwa
you might recall we had that picture
tingola
that we
picture
used
yore
that displayed
hamayin ko
the six
thukpa jak
classes
yo
of
pa
beings, and it had elements of pictures of like the demigods in their sort of plush experiences, fighting and so forth, going to battle. So it's this kind of experience which is labeled the demigod realms, and they have kind of enough sort of good fortune to be born into these sort of somewhat God realm type experiences, but then they can see what the God realms, those who have the merit in the God realms, their merit manifests in ways that they can, for example, experience and enjoy all the fruits of the tree and so forth. And then they go to battle against the gods, and the gods always win because of their karmic merit. And the demigods always lose. And so the demigods experience the great loss of battle and loss of life and all that that entails, whereas the god realms have very little of that, very few loss of life and so forth due to their karmic perceptions and experience. And so we can imagine then beings having these kinds of experiences of what we call semi-gods, the demigods. And with the kinds of suffering, so even though they have this great abundance, they have so much suffering. And they create so much suffering. And so then we can do the contemplative and resting meditations on that. And then we have the God realm experience, which is the sixth class. And so this is beings that have, it's called God realm because they experience a great amount of abundance and pleasures. And so it's a God realm experience. But they still, even though the duration of their life is fairly easy and enjoyed with many enjoyments, they still have the suffering of death and falling from that state of transmigration, migrating out of that into other states of existence. And so for the duration of their life, there's just a constant pleasure and sense pleasures and distractions of form, sounds, taste, sense, tactile sensations, and no overt suffering. Hence, God realm is defined as a God realm because they don't have direct suffering, the suffering of suffering that is in so many of the other states of existence. But then they spend their whole time sort of luxuriating in this sensual enjoyment, and eventually that comes to an end. It's impermanent, and they begin the process of dying. And so up until this point, they didn't have that experience, but as they die, then all of the sort of sensual pleasures begin to fade for them. And for example, they begin to age, their color, complexion changes, and they have these flower garlands that they've always that never have ever gotten old, and their flower garland gets old, and then their friends don't want to come near them and stay at a distance. And so there's that suffering, and then on top of that, they can see where they're going to go now that all the sort of fruits of their actions that brought this abundance and pleasure have ceased, and they're born into less fortunate states than that. And so they're about to transmigrate into, after death, to pass on into a lesser state. And they can see that, and there's fear and the hesitation and all the suffering involved in the loss of their God realm experience and what is to come. So this is called the suffering of death and transmigration. And again, like each of these six classes of beings, we want to go through the meditation just as before, where we are alternating between contemplative meditation and resting meditation, and we make it very personal and so on and so forth, just as was already explained. And so then overall, the kind of conclusion that we come to after spending a period of time of investigating every possible state of experience in cyclic existence is that no matter where we're born in samsara, there is suffering. There is no ultimate freedom. And it's characterized by the three root sufferings, which we began with. And then there are the specific sufferings of each realm that basically defines that realm and how it's named, and of each individual living being in those realms, the individual sufferings of beings. And by spending that time of kind of going through that with sort of this contemplative and resting, alternating process, then is the outcome is we begin to see how can we find freedom from that. And so in order to be freed from that ocean of suffering, May I be empowered, and these are the words in the Ngondro on page 7, the last of the 4 thoughts. May I be empowered with diligence in the unerring path of practicing virtue and refraining from non-virtue. So how do we not have to experience these states of existence and the endless sort of cycling and cyclic existence? How do we address this problem that we've now identified? And that goes into those teachings on interdependence. That each of the classes of the 6 classes of beings, all the states in samsara are a result. They are a product of causes and conditions. And only in dependence upon those causes and conditions can these results come about. And so what produces these states of existence? What produces these experiences? Because they couldn't be experienced if the causes and conditions weren't in place. And so then we begin to look at actions. AKA, in Sanskrit, the word action is karma, which implies that an action is a cause that produces a result. And we see that it all boils down to all of these are the manifestation that are they're the result of our karma, of our actions. So why do we engage in actions that produce these? Because of our concepts. Because all of the discursive thoughts and mental afflictions in our mind. Why do we have all of those discursive thoughts and mental afflictions? Because we have a non-recognition of true nature, ignorance. And how does that ignorance come about? What are we not recognizing? We are not recognizing our true nature. We're not recognizing the Buddha nature that is the natural state of our mind, its way of abiding. And that's where it all begins. Also.
Oh yeah, teni tab lang tor manor lam la zonu ho soni ne. Tande la lang tor zena lang sha tang tor sha ze lang sha ze te gewa tang tor sha ze te mergewa shipata ta tere. Ti lam la zombar nu par khok chi soni ne. Ta te ze kyore. Ta te zena ne shirtang thori la kyor shipa ke li tham chet gewa re. Dinang ke lang sha gewa ke shore. Teni ngan son la kyor shipa tham chet mergewa re. Dinang la. O te ze kyore. Ta mergewa ze te zo kanden dawo chi la ngu zongu khundu ze na. Ta ti chi shirtang khakpo re mergewa ze te luk mergewa, ngak mergewa, yik mergewa ze mergewa sam teni yorwa. Ti mergewa sam te ta korang mergewa te tak nyumu pi ngowo kanden dawo yingore ze na ngowo te ndo chik yerdang tamuk sam karong ki konil hong yong wi li chik yengu kare li chik yengu kare te taw chi la ma te karong ko hong wa yimba la te yimba kang chik la ngu tang jipi go ni number membi diwo dungar ke par shen kan chik ma la mergewa ze kyore korang te zena korang gyu te ndo chik yerdang tamuk sam karong ko konil hong wa yin la yimbi li chik yimba la lunga yeksum ko li kare yana action teni ti maung bim dribu tela samlo tangna ngu tang jitpi go ni dungar ke nyam su nyongor che parte o tendi ke li chik la teni zeki yore dungar nyam su nyong zayate tada gang khorwi nang la kang la kiawab lang na te tang tig ni kap ke kangar tang nyugda tham che te nyam su nyong wa te zeki yore teni da wore se ti shirna nende nga tu shirur ke khang tang na khang ke dongbo tang yarka tang tebjin to tsawa tang te tsoyo rwa te nangbjin ke khonso ten jam rebim jong wi go ni hong ko pan yong hyo pan nangbjin ni khorwa zya te tang na tan di ni kap ke li zya te ni ka te on ji chen temri ki go ni te tar to tenim de ro re gyo tang kin la te ni na taram kiram ki tim ri uchi shong yong wa re te nga cho lu tu sip sak kare zena semchen nam ma to kom 뱀보 쉬를 그 결비 ngubo 그 립삭자직 요 말아 립삭고나 샘친직 그 삭고 요래 샘친 숲삭레제나 단 코르안 로릭 tukana yo pi semchen tedak sakyo tam tame pi semchen tam cheki lip sakyo re when nga chu shiro la lika ka cheli na kolam riu chi yong ko wa riu yerpo chi shona yang da dukcha chi shona kare yin kyang na kang tar kyang shiro ko girkin tam chella tenni chi yong ko wa riu chi yong ko yor wa shiro la tenni when na khala zana tenni koram riu yore 둘로 건남 리고 요래 강을 따라 가립 시장네 nga chun jik teng gandi chendi thokla yang lika te tak thamche tela ndiu tang rana so so mjiri yong kan chigre dwa garte khorang ge girken yak po chi ma chang na zawa ni nim riu de yong gu man dwa yak po chi yong gu man dwa garte girken ti ti chang na yang thamche ma chang na yang riu yak po chi yong gu man dwa khwena nga chu te 체란다고 나 요비 체나 나오신데 약보직 이렇게 담시 만좀나 대 베지테블에서 용하요 말에 대타부직 드니 메독 모용 와던 차창도 이렇게 라락린도 요 паре 그때 나오신 때니 다 기타 켄라 때니는 즉 시손이 좀때 샘그 돌아티 시손이 좀때 조 샘그 셰케요레 샘도 조오레 디토니 즉 시니 드니 루당가 그 쪽시니 대 텐디 리카 치 리 차르니 존테 데타우 리카 테라 나투 리제 켜레 리카 코랑당 리키 왁착데 샘그 토라 빅 송아데 라 리즈 오야 테라 리제 켜레 나투 리 썩제 켜레 단다 거릭 투코 리낭 그 동아르 강 롱와치 그 노탐 축그 남지 강 롱와치 가서 khar tapar shepi jirkin chik chang songwi sem tola wakchak jik tab songna tela tani maung pa na te wakchak nang khiyo re zere ta tere matong teli jamba zom kan kaka chik yo marwa sem chen tam chik ki rana sosu sem ki wakchak top kar nang ong khiyo re kwen na malam nam jin tani na acho wab samna no tam chit tabor na ya ayo wab samna te yo re malam nam jin re o te ta to nang yong khiyo re deep sherna ne teni te nga tsu li zya chik yo re zere. Ta dandangi merge wala samlo tang so na zo ndo chik zyer dang tamuk sam ka karong ko tang mjerwi li kang zik yamba la merge wa yin tsar nip zong te tuksum karong tang mjer me pi merge wa yo ma re. Ti mri wo ngu tang jipi go ni dungar kem par chen kan chik la li tendi chik la zek yo re. Wa tendi resi.
So now we come to looking at the actions that we want to engage in, adopt, and the actions that we want to refrain from, eliminate. So the actions we want to engage in are positive actions, which is my preference to the word virtue, but it would have been a very long sentence. So, positive actions, and the actions that we want to refrain from are negative actions, aka non-virtue. So as long as when you read the word virtue or non-virtue, you think positive actions that produce positive results versus negative actions that produce negative results, then virtue and non-virtue is correct in terms of the term. So how do we identify if something is, for example, negative, a negative action, aka non-virtuous? It has both then the sense of what is taking place when we engage in it at the time of the cause, and then it has the sense of what that then produces, the result. So when we engage in an action, there are 3 levels. So in the case of harmful or negative actions, non-virtues, then we have our body, our speech, and our mind. And the sort of root from which all actions spring is our mind. And then, we carry them out physically and verbally. So when we look at non-virtue, it's defined based on what's taking place in the mind. And so then it's when the mind is disturbed, is having mental afflictions, so it's motivated out of, we can say, the three poisons of the mind. Desire, aka, or you could call that attachment. Anger, or you could call that aversion. And ignorance, or you can say unknowing. If our mind is motivated out of any of these three factors, then the action is defined as a negative action. Because what it produces in the future, either directly or indirectly, what we call the fully ripened effect, the karmic effect, which is generally far down the road, it's not the karmic result. It's not the immediate effect, it's the karmic result of that, is negative. So at the time of the cause, there's a negativity. Our mind is embroiled in its own personal desires or anger or ignorance, any one of those. And then we enact that physically, verbally, mentally. And then that imprints our mind with a habit or a habitual imprint, which eventually, far down the road, when the causes and conditions come together, becomes a result, which is that we experience the result of that action. And that's what we mean when we say karma. It's both the action when we engage in it at the time of the cause, we're creating karma. And then when we're experiencing its result, we're experiencing the results of karma. And so when we experience suffering, no matter where we're born into cyclic existence, we experience some kind of suffering. That is the result of those actions. That's the karmic results, the results of those actions. And in general, results, when we talk about causes and results, there are many different factors. There's a sequence in which they sort of grow and then bear fruit, ripen. And there's all kinds of contributing conditions. And so if we look at like a tree, we have the root cause, for the tree, and then eventually it grows, the seeds, and then it grows into, and we have the sprout and the trunk, and then that has branches, and then those have leaves, and then eventually fruit, and so forth. So it occurs interdependently. And so just like that, that is how our experiences of samsara unfold. The interdependence of causes and conditions moment to moment as they grow and manifest. And we can only have a result independence upon its cause, and it also needs contributing conditions, and those have to be complete. If the causes and conditions aren't there, the result will only be partial or somewhat. It won't be complete. And so then also, when we look at who creates those causes and conditions, it has to be a sentient being, meaning one who has mind, a conscious experience. It's not inert matter, non-sentient phenomena like rocks and so forth. Those aren't creating karma. Those don't accumulate karma. Sentient beings accumulate karma, meaning we accumulate actions. And those actions eventuate in our experience of all the different cyclings we have throughout cyclic existence in these 6 classes of beings. And as infinite numbers of beings with infinite kinds of experiences. And whether that's kind of a positive experience or whether it's a negative experience, it's all associated with and connected to the causes and conditions that are producing it. And we can see in a very simple, non-karmic way, we can see, like in our immediate experiences, we can see how everything is connected through cause and result. So for example, what kinds of food we eat, it has a result on our body. What kinds of clothes we wear have a result, an effect that they have. we can see how everything around us is that there is a relationship that is occurring, a cause and an effect, and so forth. That there is no then action that does not produce a result. There is no result that doesn't come about through an action. Nothing is disconnected. You don't have a result without a cause or vice versa out there. So nothing happens meaninglessly for no reason, disconnectedly. This is something that we really, really should think about seriously. Why? Because when we say karma, we don't see it, right? We don't see how it's functioning right now. It's not a direct object of our perception. We can't see it with our eyes. We can't hear it with our ears. We can't touch it with our hands. But it's functioning. So, for example, if we engage in an action, we take life, we steal, we deceive someone else, then we lie, we speak harshly, and so forth. So we might say all kinds of nasty words and whatnot. And then we don't see the immediate, we don't see the karmic results of that are not the immediate experience that we have right there. So because it's not immediate, we don't know how to connect. Who cares? So we might think it just disappears. Who cares? Like we get away with it. But that would be a grave error on our part. Because every single thing in the universe has a result. It has a function, an action associated with it. And that action, that function has a result, produces something, affects something. So for example, right now this flower is just sitting here in front of me. It's just sitting there, right? But it has a result. Like it can just sit there and it will still produce an effect. Effect. Yeah. It has the power to affect. So, for example, if a bird is flying in the sky, it's engaging in an action, right? That there's a result of that. Why do we think we can cause harm to many other living beings, physically, mentally, verbally, and that there's no result to those actions? That would be stupid. To think there's no consequence to our actions. So then the accumulator of karma is, the principal primary accumulator of karma is the mind. And the mind is a very subtle thing, and that's an object of knowledge. And our actions being causes that produce results is an extremely subtle phenomena in our mind. So it's not something that's easy to directly perceive. It's a subtle, knowable object, so to speak. So for example, for instance, we have our Earth that's spinning in space. And prior to science, nobody knew how that, didn't have any sense of how that sort of mechanism is. You couldn't see it. You didn't even, know you were spinning in space. It was unknown to us because it wasn't our direct perception. Because it was too subtle for us to be able to see with our direct senses at this moment. But through science and, and how that's evolved, then we've found ways to be able to see that. And to know that and to learn about it. For example, like a peacock. And we think of the peacock's tail with its many colors. So many vivid colors. Each one has a cause and condition that made it like that. But we don't know what those are, do we? We couldn't pinpoint every single cause and condition for each color of pigment on that peacock's tail. It's too subtle. A crow is black. And there is a reason. There is a cause and condition for its blackness. We might not know what it is, because
탑이
it's so
땜질지.
subtle. It's a subtle interdependence. Subtle means less imperceptible levels of interdependence, causes and
So
results
리
that we don't
김리제한테
see.
땐디금 타와지.
So karma is subtle in that it is imperceptible. It's not something that we can directly experience with our senses.
성기동 평소 생활
But Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, for them, it's a direct perception.
Okay.
They can directly experience it.
So 땐디 13로
And so it's important that we think about it, actions. There's nothing that goes without a cause. Nothing happens without producing a result. And there's never a disconnection between those causes and results. Now, how much causes and conditions, like they also have to be complete for the complete result. And anytime they're incomplete, it will be a different kind of result, not the full thing. Like, for example, a garden. And you have your vegetable garden and so forth. If you don't have all just the right causes and conditions, the vegetables won't grow and they won't flourish. And so every single thing that happens has a wide range of causes and conditions that it occurs in dependence upon and in relation to, and then that result or fruition arises.
It's a very funny.
Funny.
So
sometimes my thumb here is a little bit numb on occasion. And then if I go back to then there's something going on behind my shoulder blade. And then that connects. So then the sensation I'm experiencing is in my thumb, but actually it's causes somewhere else.
Yeah, magi 깡빈 즈모
or maybe like there's something going on at the tip of your toe. But actually, you have to look, and then maybe you find that there's something going on in your brain that's affecting you down there in your toe. Interdependence is extremely subtle, meaning it's imperceptible. We can't see those. It's not a direct perception, what causes produce what results and so forth. We don't have that direct perception. But we do know that when they're complete, the results are complete. And when they're absent, the results are absent. And that there is a dependency on cause and result. And through various forms of inference, we have figured out certain levels, certain kinds of cause and result in our natural environment and around us. In this case, we're looking at the overall, the greater cause, like why are we even born as humans and as sentient beings into each of these 6 classes of beings. And that is, again, just like the natural world around us is dependent upon causes and conditions, that too is also. And it is not a direct perception from us. And so that's why one of the things the Buddha said, he said, karma, cause, and result then is so incredibly subtle. Even the subtlemost single imperceptible factor produces a result, and it never gets wasted. It never disappears and doesn't happen to do that. It won't just, that doesn't happen. That's how subtle the level of imperceptibility of karma, our actions being causes that produce results. And so the whole basis of the Buddhist tradition being the conduct is based on doing no harm, is based on understanding the subtle most levels of cause and result. That no cause doesn't produce a result. And so it says, do not harm others even to the slightest degree at all. So even one thought that wishes to harm another, wishes harm on another, we have accumulated karma. We've engaged in a mental action that will have a result that will be similar to it. That result will come. So when it comes to cause and result in terms of our actions, karma, the principal determining factor is our mind. It's the intention, the thought motivating in the mind. And then it is expressed and supported and carried out by our body and speech. And then when we engage in actions, those are habitual imprints placed in the subtle aspect of the consciousness of our mind. And so as we build habits, we make habits through these actions, we are accumulating karma, we're accumulating actions. And then eventually those actions in culmination when all the causes and conditions come together, they manifest as our experience, as the 6 classes of beings. Those are karmic perceptions, the outer universe and its inner contents, whatever those may be like, however they may arise to our perception. When all the causes and conditions are complete, the result is manifest. And so we can say these are the manifestations, or these are the projections, the apparent projections of our habitual imprints, of the habits in our mind. And we might wonder, can karma be that strong that it creates the whole realm of our experience? Is that possible? Well, go back to the dream. And those habitual imprints, they manifest as an entire realm of experience out there in the dream states, and that is perfectly possible. And so
Dewa
too
dungar nikam nyung hu
and
duwa nga
in
tu ngalam
dreams we
nami.
have both pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering, don't we? And so just like that, in our waking experiences are similar. And those appearances are the results of actions, karma. So if we define actions, then what in terms of positive or negative, the negative actions means that at the point of motivating from our mind, beginning with our mind, they're based on attachment or desire, anger or aversion, and ignorance. And then we engage in whatever action that we do, and those are called negative actions. Why? Because their result is negative. Their result is that of suffering. So you can define them as negative either based on their cause, which is always associated. You cannot find an action of causing harm that is not associated with one of the 3 poisons. Or you can define it as negative based on the result, that it produces suffering. And in either case, then it's negative, and so we can call that negative actions, or sometimes when it fits better in the sentence, non-virtue. Also,
Oh ya ta karma pionga nga.
we will take a 15-minute break. Listen.
Am I live?
You are on, do you see?
All right. When you shaking your head, have some result too, because I understand. That is the confirm that. Okay, okay. Oh yeah. Teni ta teni nga tsu lantur malon la oh yeah ta li gimri chapi kapyore. Teni shirtang ka merge wa ka nyumon pa te katse yore zena. No, tze mare. Merge wa katse yore zena. Merge wa jipate hali pa ma po yore. Koran sem ka tokni nam tok mambo chikta ta merge wa chakhi yore. Sozu kewu sem nang ka nam tok mambo chik ndo nan do chik je tang tamuk sem ki ked yungwi nam tok hali pa mambo yore wa. Yena ti mang che wa ta par che wa ta merge wa yin kare. Ti shir na ne teni ta te tabu merge wa mambo yod na yang teni ta gewa yang mambo yod chukore. Teni merge wa yang mambo yod chukore wa. Ti shir na ngin di nir kapso gewa tang mergewa tam che riri nini gewa che tang mergewa che kain lap ka man mang tsam chik zong ga yin yin na ti zir ni kar che hu ka ki ma shak ka yin to yin na teni shir tang ka gewa tang mergewa gewa yang sem yang mang bo yore mergewi sem yang ha jang mang bo yore yin na yang teni korang ragram tsam chik ragrak chik dub yik na gewa che tang mergewa che zeni ta teni chik ka nang la zeguk yore gewa chi tamar gewa ches ti nangla mergewi sem tamchen da kamare mare ti nangla mergewa tamchen da kamare gewa tamchen yang da kamare kawa yenna yang teni zonte ta li jimri tam derwa mixer wa yopi ta di li korwa ka tori kyor sheke kir gewa tang ngansong somla kyor sheke mergewa re ti goni dubjigna chelong tamchik ti nangla ndaga yore 다당이 라베 디나 마토모 잠바 게와 삼키 메케파 코나 가투 람 탐체 코양도 요 마르바 샴바는 디나 문둑 녀르제는 디나 문둑 디게위 셈 거나 요 마레 데니 좀테 코나 히럽는 문둑 땅엔전 문둑 데타부 마보 요 마르데 인나 코르와 코랑라네 케어르셰피 게와치 땅머 게와치 리 땅모 바남키 땅보 가투 란토르셰 구사테 강레 제나네 디체롱치티노 더그레 제레 데인나 땅모 when mergewap che de kangre zena chok cho patang chik ta luki li sam zere ngak li je ze yiki li sam ze te sop che de tinoni tambo ta luki goni 쪽쪽 바당 마신 발렘 바당 대비진도 높이 높으려면 바당 섬대 루이기 머게 와 섬세 더니 ngak 전당 참아 측습 ngak 비시대 ngak 비시레 얘기 납섬 노섬 lokta 비시대 더니 따대 따대 소리 땅아주 땅보 지스텐 라 요고야테 디낭 그 기비 람란 죽고 사타나 머게위 펑고사 그 첼롱 담직 담보 텔리 김디 그 랑토르샤 피르니 감나 테카쳔보레 에제 테이나 티나니 담보 ngi ngma kirang tola lapswa do chig che tang tamuksum ke ke pa yin kre ze mergewa yin na tangi te kirang tola ke tsir dor du ba tam ji khwe chig jak khwe na chok chut da wo yin na yang tuksum ki ke chok yo re khwe na kha tang pag pa song do pi go ni chok che chok yo re 대니 콩토고 고니는 잡사 초코요레 대비엔토는 대니 흑도묵고 고니는 다 마르비 셰프탁치그레 흑도묵제나 마르바가 대니 대 마르바 하장 거락바치그레 대니 셰르당 그 타비 마르바데 마레 단 럭비 마르바데 테레 대니 테제나나 회나 디 마르바데 가르제 니루키 모오 마키비 마르바 믹서 제기요 마레 옛날 가레 제키오리지난 디 마릭 파테 ngachu tamuk zekiore ti marik pate karere zena ne hoena strukchona gevares strukchona ngam thori kompa top kre zeni ters ngam ngachu lorgyu gnan jikten ji khamma bola yang strukchona yegbo tsam kan de rik hachama boyore te karere zena na pilula tamuk re zekiore oya karere zena li gimdi knamjig maki bi ti temdir knamjig maki bi tamuk rewa ti goni strukchete 딥시나 뚝숨 기고니 쪽자탑 거와 어야 데니 맙신 발렘바양 뚝숨 그 요초그래 노측 기고니 맙신 발렘바는 요초그래 데니 존테 노측 콩토 그고니 맙신 바는 렌 초그래 이엔타인데 데니 공 회나 저런 그 나주 특그 리베니치 제한데가
Advantage.
칼론 advantage 제한데가 advantage 제한데가 데이터부 드니 디고니 금마까야 당 영어 뜨무고 고니 금마기나 여보임 밥삼니 금마까야 요래 대진도 높이 높으라 엠바양 요축을 노축 고니 로임 요축그래다 옛나 잔락 높이체도 콩토고 곤롱고니 하니 짱 회나 데 로임이야 요축그래 대진도 뜨무고 고니 짱네 드니 로임 시나네 때 람양 딱 바임 바당 추임 밥삼네네 드립셔야 요래 데르타묵레 대비엔토는 네 가수 ngakbji delaya zintang chama siktsip ngakher tetso bji delaya dochig jetang tamuk tamche tamderba yopi goni chokhuyore dochig goni zinshat chogre kongtu goni zinshat chogre marpi goni zinshat chokhondwa oya tendi chini ngakbji teang teni tertarto 대 초코요레스 대비진도 이기 있나 다 파체 영카카레 더 샘그 돈이 쪼우셔거와 이즈야데 쪼 샘기 돈이 작부 바인 비셔나네 납섬 땅 납섬 지바드 강담데로레제나 납섬 지바드 노책 담데로레 젠기 게던 후보 라 롬섬 지바레 딥셔난 노책 담데르도레 대양 노책 담데르반도가 대비진도 제르당다고 있나 가레레 제나네 도치 마르타 납스 노스미 나는 제르당 담레 바요레 옌타인데 제르당 그 콜롱 그 집시니 노스미 깨게요레 노스미 대비신도 나스미 노스미 록타 지파나 테 마리팍 깨게요레 또목 깨게요레 록탑 시제나 게와요 마르 머게와요 마르스 게와 nga 마르 피마요 마르 딕파 까체시 남 리브 둥어 숑고 마르 텔람 리브요 마르 제니 꾸르압다 피티 셈 그만텔라 록타 세키오레 어야 던디 그더니 록퍼타와 지바데 테초 온던디 시니네 온 도치르 제르당 따묵섬 담제르당 머게압체데 던디 시님 제리오레스 하고 송아 미터 카레 시니 제키오레
미게위 추레레 세니 자그멘도 이나 가서 드착당 저
야
뉴먼 좀 툭숨 저 세티 쉐게도
야 드닝이 가 공람 산닉 거나라 드니 ngowote mergewa jipi ngowo de karizena gyundo chigje ta tamusum kanong ko mrer song wi li kang jigim bala naman tani maung pana miyut mo pa dungan jinshe chigla zekhore je swa ode.
So as we continue with looking at our actions being causes that produce results and defining whether an action is positive, aka virtuous, or negative, aka non-virtuous, then being dependent primarily on the motivation behind it and then likewise its result. And so then it would be either a virtuous or a negative action. And of course, we have a vast range of positive and negative actions. So their scope is numberless. And for example, if we think of all the different variety of concepts that we have, then there are so many concepts that ordinary beings have, thoughts that arise in the mind that are negative. We think about most of our concepts, if we really look at where does that way of thinking boil down to, that discursive thought or emotion come from, it's based on either our personal desires, attachment, or our aversion, anger, or our ignorance and unknowing. So a great many of our thoughts are negative. And of course, then we also have a wide variety of positive actions and positive thoughts and so forth. So typically in the discussion of looking at what causes and produces these states of existence, then the sort of scope or focus on karma becomes much more narrow, because it's really looking at what are the principal causes that produce either more fortunate states or less fortunate states. And those are summed up in what are called the 10 positive actions and the 10 negative actions. But it's important to understand then that that focus point on those are the positive and negative causes that produce positive or negative experiences, results as cyclic existence. And that's the focal point, but in no way do those cover the full scope of possible positive actions that we could engage in or possible negative actions that we can engage in. That is so vast, is so extensive. So the 10 positive actions and 10 negative actions is a very rough summary that is not inclusive of the full range of our positive and negative actions, but more than focused on what produces what kinds of states of existence of the 6 classes of beings, because those are the kind of the principal main ones that are the sort of activating factors. And of course, there are many others that have different kinds of results and so forth. So then, when we're looking at those that categorization of 10 and 10, that's really focused on what are the primary causes for birth into cyclic existence, and it can be summed up in a very kind of coarse level through that. But there are obviously many more kinds of actions that produce different kinds of effects, of course, that are experienced in that context of samsara for as long as we're here. But then if we look like at virtuous or positive actions, for example, the 10 positive actions doesn't look at what the positive actions of having loving kindness or of compassion or of wisdom, prajna, or of meditative absorption. And nor does it look at the results of like the path of accumulation, the path of seeing, the path of joining, the path of seeing, and so forth. Meditation doesn't look at any of those. It's just focused, those 10 are primarily focused on the mundane and on looking at what produces samsara overall, so that we can begin to improve upon our experience by engaging in the positive actions, disengaging in the negative ones. It's like the first step. But then there's a great range of subtlety, and it gets and of different kinds of actions that have different kinds of effects. So if we look at these 10, just taking this very basic structure of the main kinds of actions that produce our worldly existence. Then the 10, for example, harmful actions, are divided into 3 actions associated with body, 3 actions associated with speech, and 3 actions associated with the mind. And so here, I'm not going to define what each of those actions are, so much as I want to. You can see that will be in the Words of My Perfect Teacher and in other recordings that Rinpoche said that information is there to be found. But what I'd like to focus on today is looking at how then, these are negative in the sense of associated with. If you remember, I defined a negative action as being that which is based on any one of the 3 poisons of the mind: desire, anger, and ignorance, and that produces a fully ripened effect which is negative. So I want to have a look at this at a different angle today. And so then if we look at the 10 negative actions, the 4 of speech, 3 of body, 4 of speech, 3 of mind. So the 3 negative actions associated with body are killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. The 4 actions of speech are lying, speaking harshly, causing division, divisory speech, and gossip. And then the 3 of mind are covetousness, wishing harm on others, and having wrong views. And so then when we look at these, then in terms of this definition of what's negative here, being based on the 3 poisons of the mind and having fully ripened negative effect, then if we look at, for example, each of these actions, we can see that they're based on any one of those 3 poisons of the mind, that there's always a connection to one or the other or a combination thereof. So take, for instance, killing. Then either killing is done out of desire. We want to eat the flesh or use the skin or do something with that animal's body. Or it's done out of anger, like we see them as our adversary, as a danger to us, and so we take their life out of that, defensive. Or we have ignorance, perhaps, and so this ignorance here is actually a different term than the root ignorance. It's called timuk, which the closest kind of rendering in English, most people just translate it as ignorance, but it's a different term than the fundamental ignorance that is marikpa, or non-recognition of true nature. So this could be called, let's say perceptible ignorance. It's an aspect of the fundamental root ignorance because it's an unknowing, but it's not the unknowing of true nature. So then when we're defining actions as non-virtuous, we're not including that level of ignorance which simply doesn't recognize the ultimate nature. We're focusing on a coarser level of ignorance that's more perceptible, which is the unknowing, which just doesn't know or which misapprehends things on a more obvious level. So like this perceptible ignorance, timuk, might then believe that it is positive to take life, that killing is a right and a virtue. They might believe that killing will actually produce positive results, like it will bring us into higher, more elevated states. Then it thinks that killing is positive and a good thing. So that would be how then killing could be done out of this perceptible ignorance. And basically what it is that we're ignorant of. We don't recognize that our actions are causes that produce like effects, right? So we don't recognize the results of those actions. We don't know interdependence. We don't see how everything is cause and result. So it's that level of ignorance that's more perceptible. So that is how, when we talk about killing, then it's done out of the 3 poisons of the mind. Then if we look at stealing, then also, for example, we desire something. So we want something that belongs to someone else, so we steal. Or perhaps we have anger. Then we
모찌라 너
are
빠체
angry at
두손.
someone and we want them to be harmed by that loss, and so we steal. You know, or then we have some form of ignorance in that we think it's a good thing if we steal from them. So there's these different ways in which we might take advantage of another and steal out of any of these poisons of the mind. And the same goes for sexual misconduct. We could engage in sexual misconduct with anger, wanting to harm another living being as our reason for engaging in that. We could engage in it out of intense desire, of course, obviously. And we could engage in it out of ignorance, the ignorance, for example, of thinking that that is the path, that that is the way to liberation, or that that is going to elevate us or bring us into more fortunate states. So we can see how the three actions of body then are the three negative actions of our body, of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, are associated with these three poisons of the mind. Or if we look at the four actions of speech, so we have lying, we have harsh speech, we have sowing discord, and we have gossip. And so we can see, if we look at any one of those, you can find that either the mind is motivated out of desire or anger or ignorance or some form of unknowing, of not getting cause and result and whatnot. And that, like, for example, if you lie, you can lie because you want to get something, you have desire. You can lie because you have anger, and you can lie because you have ignorance. And so in these ways, what we begin to see, the pattern here, is that the principal factor that is tied to all of these harmful actions is our mind. The principal factor is the mind and the mental afflictions within the mind that then generate those kinds of actions. Oh, sorry, no, that's not what he said. Now we come to the three actions of mind. I apologize. The three actions of mind, then, we're looking at this in the mundane experience of these 10 harmful actions. The three actions of mind are covetousness, which is directly associated with desire. Where we want something of someone else's, we desire it, we hanker after it because of our own desire and attachment. Or, so we have covetousness, then we have ill will, which is wishing harm on others. That's always associated with anger. So we have the actions of covetousness, desire, ill will, anger. And then we have the actions of ignorance, of perceptible ignorance, which would be like, for example, wrong views, not believing that our actions produce like results, not accepting the possibility of past or future lifetimes, past and future experiences.
Not believing 말에 드니 코랑
Not believing, but categorically denying the possibility of it. Like that's when it's at the level of wrong view, you categorically say it's not possible, it's not the case. To deny it entirely and categorically. That would be levels of wrong view. Or, for example, thinking no matter how many harmful and negative actions that we engage in, we'll never experience the consequences. There'll never be any results for us. It doesn't matter. Those kinds of views are what are called wrong views, and if we look at that, then they're based on ignorance and not knowing, and imperceptible unknowing. So when we look at these 10 negative actions on this level, then we can see that all of them are associated with those three poisons of the mind. And so in this way, then at the time of the cause, then when we're looking at defining non-virtue, then at the cause, there's the motivating factor of desire, anger, and ignorance. And then whatever of those fruits that it produces, the future result, then the unpleasant experiences and sensations of suffering and so forth that result from those actions. And so that's how we define and why we define those actions as negative. Also?
데레 다 원한 디는 그 멀geb체 그 지흐요레즈 멀개와 체후 당 체총 간nep신 노요레즈나 다테 멀개와 치티나니 회나 루이키 멀개와 섬인나네 코랑 고름진도 쪽쪽 빠다 다 체후레 나와상지비 룩라 teni janki chokcho padena matang mamambi semchin suyinayang teni konzu cheto di tuksum kangrong ko kulong ko nilani chokcho na teni zonte teni pa chehu da halibi chokcho chokcho zayate ta nipa chehu de chihu de teni tere chimar chikanibshini kogore zena maung bi naman kang dungar chechong kang myong khore zena maung pa o teni zonte tela kwela kewa shima solar men guna kang myong khore zena na chokcho bi naman ti chihu yore tipshena chokcho pa te chihu re ze kor margya chehu de tere teni ti ji tela mapshin bilen ba te bjagore kumma kwa te ti ji ku chihu de re luki teni ndo pilopra hemba ja te samba te bjagore tandi tholang e kyang to laksar she chong som she kimsen kang re zena kerang chu khwena nga chu luktur kha khila khwena american da wo inna tok choya pala kang tsa ge mar ma bu okay yinna tani ndo pilopra hemba halipingam bare ze gyore khwena chu tani chu ba chik ndo pilopra hemde zena hali no ge gyore okay merjamba na kime jamba nyam to chik nya song sena hali ba tsa kap she gyore yinna yang ku chik thona ti chu ba ti nya tong chak ma bo sa song zena yang kang tsa ge yo mar to look to de ma to ko ma chu ge nam jin ze ge yo mar oya ti shena na tani jikting ge lug la to ngamba yurkham kang rong wa jigla se nga to ya tani yurkham kang rong wa jigla to ngamba tsa ge yo na yang to korang yutur ko goni to ngamba tsa ge yo ma to namın ki goni çok çok parçaya mahtuk kuma tani loyam ti namın kır chigre zema namın meze mara kawa kawa kor namın yore yenna ya tani kor chiya te kang chigre zena chugulula terta ngubu chunilla çok çok bi dikpa ke chig yore maung pa namın nyam sunyo oya ter tawshini kogo yore tani ngakıb jete kar rezna yang korum tang dawore kor ana manare chigpare napsim tang no sim tang napsim
Nope. Napsam no sam yit.
mar tang zin tang chama zin chim sha pa tang chama sha pa tang ciksup sha pa ngakir sha pa te so rambab jin to nga mini pa ke chi yore kar jin tim jiwo maung bi namang gum jiwo nim jim bi ni kap na tani cher che chung yore nga che gure chema chung ro do yore ti jim san ki re tani yiki na yablok shindo gula opposite re
Napsam no sam
napsam nosim lokta zena lokta ka chekare yiki samla chasang tani lokta ka chekare lokta ka ches tani ti jila napsam nosim ka chekare ti jila napsam rawa o tani shini te kono jimsan ta ta kono denbare sama ha ko gwa nga tani shini na margewa te so kanka chekare zena tani shini chekare ya tani ta margewa chicha ka nangla chachang chamdon tangna kanka chekare zena ne kanka chekare zena ne lungak ka gewa chunani chokchok ka chekare wa chachang nani sem ki gewi nani lokta ka chekare
Okay.
sem ki gewi nani lokta ka chekare te yang tani nipa kanka chekare tatong chita ti nang lokta ka chekare naman ki goni samlo tangna di nipa chechong zayate naman ki goni samlo tangna nga tsu tani chokchut te halipa chenpori chenpor tsagayore yinna rangi pamni lap tangwa nipa yuntan la sopa kang yinchang pamni tangwa kang ka chekare zina lokta ka chekare lokta kare re zina ngamma ranga gewa karwe bro na tamchit me par zo tab kare lokta kebi topki chachang ni chachang me par chakpar she tab kare chawa tang chiba 오야 코랑 던디거 던디 인거래 맞고만 영마마부 개와 드브죠 쪽자 시르셴칸 요래 카키거 개와양 드브케요라 쪽양 쪽건 나도 던이 카쇼랑 던디 카키 요래 아 딥셔나 게스타 탐쳇던 좀 로고 말해
Mm.
쪽즉 잔나
Mhm.
짬치거 인나 lokta ka tsawa ni me parzo do kyore tani mau pana inna yor gewala jukpa tantu kakdo rawo ta parcher tani lokta ta mau pana lokta li tar ma song go war to gewan juk yo mare 쪽 jot pala shi kyang na ti tani kyon chenbo chi yong yo mare inna namen samchi ma kya pare te ko gore
Mhm. 나서.
o te ha ko go ya chi re singa zo ondeni
So then, if we look at these 10 negative actions, there's also a difference in terms of the heaviness, like the intensity of their results that they produce. They're not all sort of created equal, so to speak. So part of that ties into the order, which unfortunately you have a bad translator who doesn't always write it down and then gives you them in the wrong order. So I've done you a disservice. But if you look in the books, there's an order, and if you follow that, then you're okay. So, like in terms of the 3 negative actions of body, then the heaviest one, the one that with the weightiest, worst sort of fully ripened results, is that of taking life, is killing another sentient being, be they human or otherwise. And so, purposefully, with intent, then taking the life of another being out of any of the 3 poisons of the mind. And so then that would be like killing is the sort of heaviest. It has the weightiest, the most intense, fully ripened results to experience down the road. And so weighty or heavy is based on the result, the karmic result at a future time, which may be all the way into another lifetime in terms of the amount of suffering that we'll experience as a result, karmic result of that action. So killing is considered to be the heaviest of those. Then the next one is stealing is considered to have the next level of karmic results. And then the third, in terms of these 3, then is that of sexual misconduct. A little bit of clarification that I'd like to make here is that there's a difference between karmic results and cultural perceptions. So in some cultures, for example, killing is fine. It's no big deal. It's even a good thing, and it might be considered sort of a something we're proud about, or that people praise, like killing is okay in that culture. But then sexual misconduct is huge. It's a huge no and has all these triggers and so forth. That doesn't have anything to do with the karmic results of those actions. The actions and their weight is not based on our cultural concepts about those actions. So then many people may consider sexual misconduct like the very worst thing that someone could do, like that a practitioner, like a Dharma practitioner, we could freak out if we heard that they cheated or they slept with someone and so forth. And then, but at the same time, we might think it's no big deal that a Dharma practitioner has killed thousands of fish. We're just like, But so then you can see cultural concepts and ideas around things don't necessarily correspond to the Dharma, nor with cause and result in this way when we look at this. And so that it's important to differentiate between those, that just because in a culture, and there's many cultures around the world, that some things are considered less of a big deal than others, and so forth, that changes from culture to culture based on the concepts of those individuals and their conditioning. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with the karmic result, the heaviness or weightiness of the karmic result of those actions. And so the very worst fully ripened karmic result that we can experience is that of having taken life, of having killed another living being, having taken their life purposefully. And then we have that of stealing, and then we have that of sexual misconduct. I'm not saying the fully ripened result of that is positive. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a difference in terms of the effect, the heaviness, the weightiness, how negative the result will be that we later experience. And so, in terms of the way things are, killing is the very worst thing. It has the heaviest karmic results. So it's in the order that they're given in the book, is the order in which then the heaviest, and then the next heaviest, and then the next is the degree to which they have their results in the case of harmful actions of body. And then we have harmful actions of speech. And so hopefully the order in the book starts with lying, and then sowing discord, creating disharmony amongst others, and then harsh words, and then gossip. So the first of those in the order has the weightiest effect, the worst karmic result. And then the second, and then the third, and so forth. So if we want to look at how heavy the karmic result of those is, we can look at that order in order from beginning to end. It starts with the worst and slowly gets slightly lighter and lighter. They're all negative. It's just how negative will that, how heavy is the result. And then we come to mind, and now we have a change in order. So in the mind, in terms of negative actions in the mind, the order that's given is covetousness, wishing harm on others, and then wrong views. And now the order in terms of the heaviest result, it goes the opposite direction. So the first, the most weighty of all of them is wrong views. And that one has the heaviest effects and magnitude on our experience now and in the future. The second of those, the second heaviest, the next one in line, is wishing harm on others, ill will. And the third of those, in terms of weightiness, the lighter one of the three, is covetousness. So when we begin to reflect on these, I think you can start to have a sense of the reason then for their order, and how then the heavier ones, why they're heavier, and so forth. So that's the first thing, another aspect, another kind of subtlety of these 10 negative actions. And then the next is then the very worst of all 10, the heaviest of all of them, the worst, if we look, of body and speech combined, is that of taking life. And then of our mind, the heaviest is that of wrong views. Then, in terms of their sort of like deleterious nature, of all of them, the most deleterious of all 10, the worst that has a deleterious effect and result, is that of wrong views. Followed by then killing. So this is because we're looking at, rather than killing, for example, it has a greater deleterious result. And that is like looking at like what brings us the greatest loss now and in the future, what undermines our positive qualities and insights. That would be wrong views. And it has many sort of a domino effect, all kinds of ways in which then wrong views can adversely affect us now and in the future. And so if we look at deleteriousness, having wrong views is far more deleterious than taking life. And so, for example, then when we have wrong views, such as it doesn't matter how many negative actions we engage in and all those different levels of wrong views that Rinpoche described, it causes us to engage in all kinds of actions that are very negative. So you might see somebody who engages in a lot of positive actions and kills, and so it's a mixed bag. It doesn't counteract all of those the positive actions. It's just it's negative itself, but it doesn't counteract or destroy all of those positive actions. Whereas wrong view has the power and sort of scope of effect in our mind to completely destroy all our other virtues. And so, and for as long, and it can have such a strong, not only can it have that destructive force on all those levels, but it can even be so that we could never again sort of engage in virtues until we finally overcome those wrong views. That it prevents us, for as long as we have that wrong view, that incorrect way of seeing things on whatever level about whatever, we aren't even capable of engaging in positive actions and virtue. Whereas killing doesn't do that. We might take life, but it doesn't have that like destructive force and prevention that wrong views have, and so forth. So in terms of you could even kill and still believe in past and future lives and karma and results. You still might even accept that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and go for refuge. But if you have wrong views, all of that is out. Any sense of consequence of your actions or that anything matters at all is not present with wrong views. And so we just fundamentally see things opposite to how they are, and it has a vast and profound impact on us and our actions overall. So in terms of the heaviness of actions, like the worst, in terms of the fully ripened effect and its heaviness, definitely killing is at the top. But in terms of deleterious and destructive nature, wrong views is the most deleterious. And so these are some sort of subtle aspects that helps to understand. Listen.
Tere tate chitani ta li gimri ore tani gewap chiji bade kerangzu tani chokchapi dokshok chokcha patang ta gewa kyaparwase tani chokchapa mapshin balembi dokshok jimbab jimba dopi lopre yembi dokshok tsatum chongwa domba chongwa se korwa tani domba chongwa tani zin ke dokshok tani changbor shepa zin chama ke dokshok komba domba zindang chama tsiktsuk ke dokshok tsik nyambo dang jambo shaya zindang chama tsiktsuk ngankar ke dokshok tam ton tang chipa gewi tam tang tam ton yo pa nyangbo yo pa tenib jo ya te o dini da wo zekere teni tetso teni zere teni napsim ke dokshok tongsim changwa tang nosim ke dokshok pansim nyangje sok pansim zongwa tang napsim nosim lokta ke dokshok yang takpi tawa gilla ket pate tetso rawa o tandiri dawo chigla teni gyab chize kyore ta deksha gum tang jogum kyang tu shep ore ta tong chiglab kore teni ta kar reze na ore re re ta te shagum tang jogum shepe ne kamna kare gu kyore ze na gewa tang mrgewa tham chet tang ne ti mriwo vyarni koalengu kyore korang ti li gumri nang la kyang tu ta da ti nang la yore kia shima kan korwi mriwu kang tang kang yong kyo te tang vyarni shagum tang jogum na mrgewa ndipchi sona ti mriwu ndiri re ndipchi na tendri re samya ka tani korang tani gewa yin na ti mriwu kang yin te cho tani tendipchi ni hako gu kyo re ze vyarni tani shagum tang jogum she gu kyo re te la vyar tang te li ke mriwu vji go ni vyar yore te kono lam yalong nang yore mriwu vji yore na lik chik yin nang lik chik te lam mriwu vji yo choko yore o tendipchi ni na tani ti mriwu chu kande chi ro windu ti mriwu li ndipchi na nan mriwu kang jong windu te cho tani to vyar ni na nyamnim shaya tang lob jong shaya te ta tendipchi ni ro gu kyo re ze tana wo na shir tang ke rak tsam kwa to samlo tang na li karib shi ni ngan song samla ken ro windu samna ne kong su kyapar karen du ze na tani nyumo pi tuk sum ki wang to samlo tang na ne yer dang ji kul nong gu kun nin hawa te cho 망체와테 나락 유라 계획용 간 때리 대비전 또 노치 오래래 노책 고니 leave sakpalap tenni maru sakpa lima bo sakpalap tenni so sakpalap tenni zekore tu sumnan rio na so do chak lima bo sakchi ke tolap sak yonna tim dio ma ba yetak tenni kyalen ya de tein kyore dev jin to do chak la yang yang to tenni
Timuk.
ah
Timuk.
o tamuk zeda tamuk yang kombi top ki tendo ke kerni ke kyo pate tenni chini top jer go to nyumo bi kolong go ni samlo tana tenni chile ya yore yang Teli Jambi teni mangyong tang top che chong go goni bjariya chik yo. Ta kare re zena tuk sum ki goni tera wa to che ye tang tamu sam ke chi te chi ore. Mergewa chembo sak palap teni lunga yek sam ki mergewa kang ina teni narak ni tang mrang sam sak palap teni teni yetak ni tang teni tama sak palap teni tendu kerni si kekyo pa de on dedi chini korang shirtang ke koso top katse che chung sakya de te yore nyomo bi kolong chi po maim pa tendi chini yore ta li ke korla hachang ke ma bo gipap sha yore ta tar ngamma ngi te te kerang so sha nyong ngamma nga zu rik tuk ke nam shak sha pe ni kam nang sha nyong te men na yang jan tang jan ni te ni ma bo sha nyong kerang su te la te ni kale ko alen gore tandi li gimri ke nam shak te hachang ke nam pilu la kar chen bore te hakoya chik tang rong ke yin te la lang tur tang fang lang yak po chik che ya te ha li ba kar chen bore tangi kong tun di nang la kya rang so ko chik len go ya la onan di mer ge wap che tham ba ka tu sak na yang korwa ke war kona she kit ma to ko ma tara to par she ke mar we ze na she kre ta kare re ze na na rong ko ki u chung chik lam nyam su len bi wang tu sam lo tang na korwa la koram thori ke or she kre ta konari yenna ki unrang ki kolno kwa na ngimjong ku sambi zan bi goni ngronin tarwa ko ma chikpu ron chikpu tari ko ma tak chik to topar shawi che to nyamnen shinane tani tari ko ma top kare kwa na nyana drap chombi ko ma topa na u she kare ti tang to ngimjong ko tang to tarong shang chu sem ki zan na tak chin ki tani shang chu sem ki zan sona ne den tar tu pim riu shang chu chenbu ko ma topar yang di gyab che ti she kare oya ta kare she kare rang na so su kon long la rag li re onap shang chu sem ki kon long ko kon ni han ni gya tham che sak na yang korwi na ke go ku sam bi kon long ko map sak na korwa ke ge re ze na ke gre ta korang ta ni shang chu sem ki zam bi kon long zan kyang na on kyang ta ni gya te tang te sak pi she li ke top ko tarom thori la yak po ke kare che rang wa nan me pam thori ge yon tam den tang tam bi dag ni chen la sok pi ram chen chen te ke kare o te no ba chang yo ma res o te ti ha ko gu gu
Then, so we have those 10 negative actions and then the 10 positive actions, which are essentially the opposite of those, and then the absence of the 10 negative actions. But in opposite, when we have this 10 sort of positive, when it becomes positive, is when we engage in the opposite. So we refrain, not only do we refrain from taking life, but then we protect life. Not only do we refrain from stealing, but then we give, we are generous. And then not only do we refrain from sexual misconduct, but we have vows of ethical discipline that we uphold, like the lay practitioner vows, for example. And then the 4 positive actions of speech is we not only refrain from lying, but we are honest and forthright. We refrain from sowing discord. Not only that, but then we try to bring people together and create harmony in what we say to each other. Not only do we refrain from harsh speech, but we then speak kindly and gently. And not only do we then refrain from gossip, but we try to speak about things that are meaningful and beneficial. Then the 3 positive actions of mind is not only do we refrain from covetousness, but we have the continuous wish to give. Not only do we refrain from wishing harm, but we wish to benefit, such as having loving kindness and compassion towards others. And then not only do we refrain from having wrong views, do we discard those, but we cultivate in our mind views that accord with the way things are, authentic or correct views and values. So those are the 10 positive actions. And then there are so many different nuances to these. On the one hand, then I definitely encourage you to use the words of my perfect teacher and to read through it slowly and contemplate and read and contemplate, alternating between the contemplative meditation, which is the reading and thinking about each point, and the resting meditation, and going through each of these actions. But then also you'll see a lot more details about these actions there in the book that talks about the kind of results that they produce. And so there's a lot to be gained. So when you're doing the mind training, which is you're reflecting and meditating on those, you want to join, you see those actions as being causes, and you want to join them with their similar or like results. So you're connecting the cause and the results that are explained in the book in much greater detail. And so we're looking at how our actions are causes that are producing results, the results primarily which ripen far into the future, such as in our future lifetimes. And then we're looking at those results and we're comparing them to the causes, and we're alternating between contemplative meditation and resting meditation for each of those. And so understanding each action, both positive and negative, as a cause, and then its like results that it produces, and going through that in a kind of a very careful and measured way. And so in the book, it joins, there's like 4 sort of relationships between cause and result, in the words of my perfect teacher, that you'll see. And how those results are, for example, like one action can produce many results. And so we can look at these different aspects of the relationship between cause and result, and really looking at the causes and then the force of the result that those produce, and really training our mind in them. So we are beginning to get a kind of a general picture, a rough picture of each and every action being a cause and relating to it as a cause that will produce a like result, and what those results might be depending on the action, depending on the motivation behind the action, which also makes a difference. And so we can look at these nuances of like, depending on then which of the disturbing emotions is prominent, then also reinforces how those actions results, the results of those actions happen. For example, if we engage in many negative actions, then, and they're based primarily on anger, then that fully ripened result in terms of a realm of existence manifests as the narak, as the hellish states. So that's like, we can look at anger as that's the dominant factor, and if there's a sufficient amount of it and actions based on it, then it can produce that realm. Or if our actions are really predominantly based on an influence or all around desire and attachment and so forth, then if there's a sufficient amount and a strength of that, then that can result, that manifests as the realm of the hungry ghosts. Or if then the predominant emotion behind the actions is that of ignorance and unknowing and confusion or bewilderment, then that produces animal realm states. So we also want to see how then the disturbing emotion is one of those main factors for if we engage in huge actions, how those will kind of manifest on a vaster scale that are associated with, that are like or similar to those mental afflictions, those mental states. And so we can look at that. The motivation makes a difference. Another aspect that we look at is the amount. So like how many of the actions we engage in repetitively over time, and also the strength behind engaging in those actions. And so if there's a lot of them, a lot of harmful actions and a lot of strength behind them, motivated out of any of the three poisons, then that is what produces, like if we engage in the worst forms of negative actions, and there's so many of them, then cumulatively that's what it results in the overall experience of narak in hellish states. If we engage in a medium amount of those negative and harmful actions motivated out of the three poisons, then that amount may result in or manifest as a hungry ghost realm. And if we engage in just a smaller amount in comparison to the other two, then that could result in the animal realm. And so then we're looking at the predominance of which emotion is present. We're looking at how many times we engage in the action, how intense and powerful that action is. And all of those are varying factors that contribute to their overall fully ripened effect. And so it's not just the motivation behind it, it's also the repetitiveness and the strength behind it and so forth. So we can see that there's a lot of variances in then these different negative and positive actions, and which of the realms that they overall contribute to manifesting as our karmic projection or experience within what we call the 6 classes of beings, why we experience each one, what produces those. And so thinking about, and Rinpoche said, this is just a brief overview, and in other teachings I've given more detailed instructions when looking at the 6 classes of beings and describing them. And also then there are many resources like the Words of My Perfect Teacher that go into greater detail on our actions being causes that produce results. And from a Buddhist perspective, this contemplation is crucial to our path and practice, because our kind of awareness of our actions as causes that produce results really influences, it affects the choices that we make, what we choose to engage in and what we choose to disengage, and what we want to cultivate and enhance and what we really want to decrease in us. And looking at the function of our actions and the effects and the results of our actions is so important. It's really a crucial point in being able to practice this path, because our actions, not only do they produce our worldly experiences, but also our positive actions don't only have to produce positive results within the states of existence, they can also be a contributing factor to our finding freedom. And so on top of that, there's that kind of mundane aspect. But then if we're motivated in certain ways, then those actions can be contributing factors that enable us to have, to engage in the path, and then eventually to find freedom from cyclic existence. So we talk about kind of based on our motivation, we would be categorized as different sort of levels of beings. And so the lowest level of being is someone who's motivated on wanting physical comforts, to be comfortable in samsara. And if that's their motivation when they engage in positive actions, then it's true. They can disengage in harmful actions, engage in positive actions, and thereby only produce the more fortunate states within existence for a period of time, and that result will be achieved. And then you have the individual of kind of like a middling sort of scope of motivation that's motivated out of wanting to find total freedom from all suffering, but on a real personal level of personal salvation. And that middling scope will bring that nirvana of the universal vehicle that results in, for example, the states of transcending suffering of an arhat and of the Shravakas and so forth. And so that's when they're motivated out of renunciation. So that's the determination to be free. If then those positive actions are motivated out of renunciation, the determination to be freed, and then on top of that out of bodhicitta, then we look at results that are contributing to the bodhisattva path, to bodhisattvas resulting in cumulatively in the states of bodhisattvahood and later in Buddhahood. So these 10 positive actions are also contributing factors to our spiritual path and progress. And so it can go beyond just the direct mundane results that they might do in ordinary circumstances based on whether our motivation goes beyond that. And so I'm very much connected to our intention. And that's important also to remember that always. Whether they just produce a short term, sort of mundane effect or are contributing to that greater path and realization is dependent upon our own motivation. And that's why we always say to begin every positive action with the motivation of bodhicitta, to start by cultivating that intention. And so, might we still be born into samsara as a result of those actions when we have the motivation of bodhicitta? Yes, it can still serve that function, but it can be one that is contributing to our continued progress on the path towards awakening, so that we're born into more and more positive circumstances conducive of our practice, where we have what they call like the seven noble riches of the higher or more fortunate realms, which is longevity, for example, lack of sickness, good health, and so forth and so on. And so then we can see then that there's an importance in the role, not just on a mundane level, but also in terms of our spiritual path and progress as well, in terms of our actions. And so that's just a little bit more, a few various details and nuances that we want to bring to our practice of karma cause and result also.
Oh yeah, tani ta terang. I think that's we're going to stop here today. I really wish to go a little bit more next sections that refuge in bodhicitta. I thought, but it didn't go that way. So I'm sorry, but you can practice these four thoughts until we teaching next time about the Ngondro. So I think we teach another one, maybe after sometimes Shatta. So I don't know when, but I'm going to make a schedule. Then you can see. Don't missing this time, okay? Because I think this time our group right now, you who receiving these teachings, Ngondro group, this Ngondro teaching this time, and the future, and also not receiving teachings. I hope you really do practice too, because in the future I have you know. Uh, Slowly, eventually, we're going to making different schedules for this group. So will be in the future very important, this group, okay? Then you do practice much as you can. And then we next time we're going to teach refugee section and the bodhicitta section. So after chapter sometimes. Okay, that's I want to tell you.
Shadrach, you were Tessasumgembe?
No.
No? Awesome. So we'll send an email out to all those who are registered for the dates.
We see you in the chapter.
We'll be dedicating the merits, which is page 5 of the teachings or your handouts. Consolo dok nam chi dawa sum ring gom jam labo.
I thought I wanted to say something, but it's not. Oh yeah. So today I taught these 10 non-virtuous actions and 10 virtuous actions. So I think you really need to care for this time these days, because this world is a little bit going crazy right now. You know that. But that time you can have very easily can have negative mind and also negative actions. And careful, because you may be making a lot of non-virtuous. these days. So therefore, you please more cultivate uh, 10 virtuous actions. Take that action much as you possible now. No matter what this world is going on, but our mind, we cannot go that way. Same way in this world, we're having big problems now, but we need to protect our mind at the same time. Even you don't have any like a strong something meditation or something you carrying into the path, everything, anything, but even you focus these 10 actions, okay, that's it enough if you really able to do this. That's protect you. So very important. Otherwise, even you can hear something news or you see some newspaper or what's going on this world or what's going on this country, and you just angry and you just don't like it, and they're hating those people or those people, then where is your positive mind, and where is your bodhicitta practice? Where is your lojong going on? What is earth is going on?
What on earth is going
What
on?
are earth is going on? No.
What on earth is
What is on
what?
earth?
Yep.
Yeah, going on. What on earth is going on?
Perfect.
Okay. So careful, very, very careful these days. And also Sangha, I know these days we cannot gathering together so much, but also you calling each other a lot. I know that. And then that time careful, you just gossiping or you just um, like you using harsh words or you this negative emotions. What you bring that time? You really Sangha or you are not Sangha. I mean, as a companion.
Mm.
Companion is you have to
Mm.
be, companionship is you have to be like Sangha. That means you always have to support each other. The mind is going to positive direction, not bring them, uh, taking them bad directions. Okay, if you do that, you are not Sangha. Sangha means in Tibetan we call the Gendun. The Sangha is a Sanskrit. You remember, you need to know always your how do I say your title. You are the Sangha. Why I call you the Sangha? In Sanskrit, the Sangha means as a in Tibetan we call the Gendun. That means as a motivation or your pursuit of virtuous. It's not a pursuit of motivation. It's non-virtuous. Okay. That's not Sangha. You understand. You have that title. Sangha, thank you. You are very good Sangha. Okay, I love you and good night.
So dedication on page 5 of the booklets or somewhere else if you have a handout.
Sonam de yi tamche zikpa ni tomni ni pi dana pamchi ni kirga nanchi warlong tukpa yi tupim solin doa dorwar ko kewa kundu yang to lama tang dharme chuji wala longsho satang lamje yondan dorjen jangge kompanyer to ko jakwal kwawu chirtar kemba tang kundo zampo te yang tepjen te to kunje jiso dalo gewan da to tamche raptor ngo tu so jabe jawa tamche gewi sawan da kun kyang zampo choche rap ngowar ge in English.
Throughout all lifetimes, wherever we are born, may we attain the 7 qualities of the higher realms, and at birth may we meet with the Dharma and have the complete freedom to accomplish it accordingly. There may we serve a qualified Lama, and day and night be immersed in the Dharma. Through realizing the teachings, may we accomplish the meaning of the heart essence, and in that very lifetime cross over the ocean of conditioned existence. At that point, may we teach the sacred Dharma within conditioned existence and tirelessly accomplish benefit for beings. May the great waves of impartial benefit to others bring everyone simultaneously to Buddhahood. Throughout my many lives and until this moment, whatever virtue I have accomplished, including the merit generated by this practice and all that I will ever attain, this I offer for the welfare of sentient beings. May sickness, war, famine, and suffering be decreased for every being, while their wisdom and compassion increase in this and every future life. May I clearly perceive all experiences to be as insubstantial as the dream fabric of the night, and instantly awaken to perceive the pure wisdom display in the arising of every phenomenon. May I quickly attain enlightenment in order to work ceaselessly for the liberation of all sentient beings. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas all together, whatever kind of motivation you have, whatever kind of beneficial action, whatever kind of wishing prayers, whatever kind of omniscience, whatever kind of life accomplishment, whatever kind of benevolent power, and whatever kind of immense wisdom you have, then similarly I, who have come in the same way to benefit beings, pray to attain these qualities. At this very moment, for the peoples and the nations of the earth, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard. Rather, may their moral conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme good fortune and well-being always arise for them. Kongri rawe korwe jingam sum bandam alun ju ini chenre ziwan tenzeng gyamzui shabe garge barde deng yer jing Kongri zhadu nga gyur nima ba kondon duje dengi gyamzab jing Guru Vidmi Duju Dulongin Damba Zingyom Bawe Wangchu Ba Drupdo Namka Gyalzen Rui Gu Gonye Lodru Taye Mingzen Ba Yini Guzi Shunjin Tampen Tanzan Wei Chung Zhu Shuyen Benden Jue Nijin Bun Damba Yunrin Nebandang Damban Zambi Jibo Nam Kuze Gyanzan Dangirji Kato Baji Karpo Lato Etra Trapan Tai Jalabi Chadon Jalwa Kunta Yemeje Jedir Tashi Yunara Tambarko. Okay.